Welcome to Marathon Champions, the podcast where running legends Benji Durden, Bill Rogers, and Ron Tabb share their timeless wisdom on marathon training and inspire listeners with their wealth of experience. These champions continue to impact the running world today.
Hi, Bobbi.
Hi there, Bobbi. We've never met.
Hi, you guys. Nice to see you.
Bobbi, I don't know. Have you met Ron or Benji before?
Ron or Benji, I seem to remember we met in passing at various marathons, but I honestly don't remember.
I can't remember meeting you. I know we're Facebook friends, but I can't remember ever meeting you. I've always
anyway, I sort of feel like I know you a little bit because I read about you and I know how amazing you are and all the stuff you've done. But
I went to your Wikipedia page today, and it was quite impressive.
Oh, thanks.
That's pretty amazing.
We've been looking each other up.
Yeah. Well, I looked, and your first marathon 3:21. I'm going. We were right there together. My first one was 3:19. So
Wow.
so we would have been right together.
It's a shadow right across the lower part of my face.
Mhm.
Or is that just
And I get to fangirl a little bit here too. So
This is Amy.
This is Amy. Looking forward to listening.
we're my
Amy,
son,
you should be joining us.
my
I don't know.
son is here. My son is here doing all the engineering. So if I
That's
talk
good.
to someone, it's my son. And
So do you still live in San Diego?
I usually am out there in the winter, but in the rest of the year or in the summer, I'm in the Boston area.
Okay. Yeah, I coached in I say San Diego. So yeah,
San
I
Diego.
coached at Cuyamaca Community College out in El Cajon.
Okay.
I say El Cajon, El Cajon.
Cuyamaca, El Cajon, all familiar names. That's too okay. Yeah. And yeah, well, I love San Diego, and of course I love New England too. I mean, the whole country is beautiful. And except I'm wondering about Florida here. Ron, in Florida, there's
Yeah, I'm I posted this yesterday that said I'm rethinking the decision of moving to Florida. And because my wife and we lived in San Diego for 10 years.
yeah.
And, that's probably one of the worst decisions I ever made was leaving San Diego.
Oh, San Diego is wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It was, I had a great position there, and we would have stayed, except my wife's mother had open heart surgery, and
Oh, God.
we ended up moving back up to Oregon to help them with their business. So, yeah, but anyway,
So you're still in Florida now with all
we just survived our second hurricane in a couple of weeks.
I've been reading about it and
Oh my God.
yes.
Well, Hurricane Ian hit us 2 years ago with 18-foot storm surges. Basically, Fort Myers Beach doesn't look anywhere, and it never will. It doesn't look the same. I mean, many buildings were wiped out, homes were destroyed, and then these last two hurricanes that we've had in the last 2 weeks, people are they've lost everything again.
Yeah.
We went to Fort Lauderdale to dodge what we expected to be the worst part of the hurricane. And then we came back last night to no power, which we knew that we didn't, but we thought that it probably would get to word yesterday. And there's nothing more enjoyable than opening up your refrigerator and after you've had no power for 4 days, it's a little things were a little ripe inside.
I bet. Yeah, just be happy. I mean,
But everything was intact, other than I call our situation very minor compared.
Yeah.
So many people have been affected adversely for many of them probably for the rest of their lives. I mean, they've lost everything.
Yeah.
So I'm not complaining at all.
Yeah, it's just horrendous, and it makes one grateful for what one does have.
Yeah. So I think we all have some questions for you, and after reading the Wikipedia, I know you and Bill are very close, but I'm so impressed with what you the real pioneer of the Boston Marathon. We talked with Bill and Benji and we talked about us being, pioneers of the sport, and helping to get the sport started, the prize money and, how it has grown over since the 60s when Will Clooney said, women shouldn't be running more than a mile and a half. That was just one of the dumbest things I think I've ever read. Especially now when you look at today, you have a woman running 2:09 for the marathon.
Amazing.
That's insane.
So I'm curious about your other racing. Had you run races much before that first
No,
one?
this is a weird thing. I was completely outside of the racing. There wasn't any racing world in the 1960s. There wasn't any running world. Hardly any men ran. And the first race I ran was in 1966. That's the first race I ever ran in my whole life. And but I came from running from a completely different perspective. I had no idea about competitive running, and as I say, even you never saw men running either. And for
it was a rare thing even when I got started that you'd.
When was that? When did you start?
I started racing in '63 on the track in junior high.
Wow.
And there were people running, but you did, yeah, if I went out and ran by myself in my neighborhood, I'd never see another runner.
Right, exactly. 63. That's early. So yeah. And there wasn't much emphasis on exercise in those days.
No.
And so yeah, so I didn't even know there was in fact there wasn't a running world then. And for a grown woman to run in public was thought to be very improper.
Well, Bobby, can you tell us the story how you had been in San Diego living there, but you knew about the history of the Boston Marathon, of course, and you wanted to run it. And there was some disagreements between your mom and dad a little bit about you taking part, and that was maybe a cultural thing. But
Yeah.
Will Clooney, I know he learned a lot about the sport. I know for a fact because I went to Japan with him in the 70s. And with Tom Fleming, and he saw how powerful running is in Japan and how respected that sport is in Japan. And I think after that is when he tried to change the sport. He tried to bring money into the sport and make it professional. So, and of course, when Hancock came on the scene, there was equal prize money given to women in 1986. I don't believe that's true in almost any other sport. Is the money equal to men's? Maybe in tennis there might be.
I would think it is true in tennis, but tennis is also one of the outliers. I mean, most of the other sports don't even have a women's component. Soccer is getting it, but they've recently had some serious issues trying to get at least the women's, the U.S. women's soccer team is better than the men's soccer team, and yet the men get more money. And there was some demonstrations over that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's got a long history. As I say, I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, and I lived near some woods, and I used to love to run in the woods with the neighborhood dogs. And I always felt so good when I ran, so free, so healthy, so happy. And I kept thinking, gee, if everybody ran, what a happy world this would be. People would be so much more happy and healthy. And there I was running with the dogs, and I had never heard of the Boston Marathon until the spring of 1964. And the father of one of my high school friends said, well, since you like running so much, why don't you go out and see the Boston Marathon? And I said, the Boston Marathon, what's that? And he said, oh, they run 26.2 miles from Hopkinton to Boston. And I said, 26.2 miles without stopping? It seemed impossible to me. I was running maybe 5 miles, maybe maybe 10. I could run from Winchester to Boston, which is about 8 miles. I used to run back and forth to art school where I was going to Museum of Fine Arts, but that was only 8 miles. And 26.2 miles, it just seemed humanly impossible. So my dad and I went out to see it in April of 1964. And I saw, for the first time in my life, I saw other people running, other people, a whole herd of people running. And I wasn't thinking men or women. I was just thinking, wow, like these are my people. This is my herd. I just identified with this human potential to run like this. And to me, it symbolized life itself. You start in Hopkinton, and you're all young and full of energy, and then you end in Boston, and you've run your race, and you've done it, and it just the incredible endurance it takes, integrity it takes to run like that. So I fell in love with it, and some inner thing just said, "You're going to run this race. You want to be part of this thing." And I had no idea. I'd never heard of the Boston Athletic Association. I thought it was just a bunch of guys that got together and ran. There's a couple hundred guys from all over the world came and ran this marathon. I guess now I know it was the oldest annually run marathon in the United States at that time. A very prestigious race, and I just blown away. And I started to train. I had no coach, no idea how to train. I just trained further and further distances. My boyfriend would take me on his motorcycle, drop me off. We'd measure miles, and I'd run back to the house. And that was how I started training. And then, of course, I did that 3,000-mile trip across the country, where I ran in a different place that all across the country in the summer of 1964. That's how I trained for the Boston Marathon.
Bobbi, did you have running shoes or did you wear tennis
No,
shoes?
I wore nurses' shoes because they didn't make sturdy shoes for women in those days. Women were supposed to sort of mince around in these little pointed toe things that, but you couldn't run. But I had been a nurse's aide. That was my first job out of high school as a nurse's aide. And they had these wonderful nurses' shoes made of leather, Red Cross nurses' shoes, very tough. And the nice thing is they had soles that were non-skid. So I could run on the rocks, wet rocks and wet leaves and stuff in the woods. So I ran in nurse's shoes.
So you were kind of like Patty Dillon Catalano. She was a nurse's aide as well and began her running after she read Ken Cooper's book written about exercise and fitness after he studied Air Force people and the response to exercise and everything. And she went out and did a 7-mile run in nursing shoes in a local cemetery. She was a smoker then and everything, like I was at one point too. But wasn't there a bit of drama between your parents or something about?
Oh, yeah. Well, you got to remember, I trained for 2 years. I didn't know if I could do this or not. I didn't know if my heart would take it. I didn't know, and I just trained and trained and trained. And for 2 years, as I say, partly going across the country. Then I moved to San Diego, and I wrote for my application. I met some track and field runners out there. Bill Gukin was one of them, and he said, "Well, gee, you gotta write for your application." And he said, "I never heard of a girl running a marathon before, but write and see you can get your number." And so I wrote, and Will Cloney wrote back and said, "Women were not physiologically able to run 26.2 miles, and they couldn't take the medical liability, and the longest race for women was 1.5 miles." Well, at that time, I was running 40 miles at a stretch, and this is through the mountains of California. And so I read that letter and I said, boy, they have something to learn. And so I wanted to demonstrate that a woman could run a marathon and run it well. And that was my intent. And of course, I also wanted to be part of that marathon. I had fallen in love with it. Love is totally irrational. And so I just was in love with that. And I wasn't even thinking men or women until I got that letter. And then I realized gee, if I can do this thing that's thought impossible for a woman, it's going to throw into question, into doubt, all the other false beliefs about women that have been used for centuries to keep women down, to keep women confined to doing housework, and you couldn't get into medical school, you couldn't get into law school, women really had very circumscribed lives in the 50s and 60s, and you couldn't even get a credit card without your husband's permission and signature, and so it went on and on and on. And I had been rebelling against this. I could see it as a teenager. I could see this is unfair. This isn't right. And so finally I said, wow, suddenly I had a way to try to change things. So my running at that point took on more of a social purpose, as well as just my own personal gratification and challenge. So when I came back to Boston, I knew I was doing something I wasn't supposed to do. That's
Bobbi,
that's why I hid in the bushes.
do you feel that you have been given credit by the BAA today? You're one of the pioneers, along with Sarah Mae Berman and Nina Kusick. And then, of course, Catherine Switzer ran, I think, the year after you did. But she did not encounter the issue entering the race as you did. And so how would you contrast yourself with Catherine Switzer? I mean,
Well,
she has quite a different relationship with the sport than you
uh,
have.
okay, that's a good question, because over the years it's been a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation and disinformation put out there. And I was a student, I was studying philosophy and mathematics and pre-med and this sort of thing. And I know not very knowledgeable in public relations or anything, but when I wrote, I did not hide my gender. I didn't hide my gender, put my real name, my full name, all the information they wanted, honestly. And so they knew I was a woman, and they refused me on that grounds. And then I challenged that. I wanted to demonstrate what was true, and I wanted to change this whole social misinformation and misidea. Even women thought they were weak, and these cultural things get going. These cultural false beliefs get going, and they take on a life of their own. And so I knew I was doing something wrong when I hid in the bushes, and I did not have a number. Of course, I couldn't get a number. There were no numbers for women. There were no women marathons. There were no women were not qualified to run in men's division races. That's fundamental. So I knew all that, and I was challenging it. And Switzer, on the other hand, claims she didn't know. She said she read about me running the year in 1966, and she read about me, and she had a male coach, and she was running with a male coach at Syracuse, I think, University, and training. And she claims she didn't know that women weren't allowed. And but she also hid her gender, and somehow she got through the medical exam, and somehow the medical papers never gave her full name or her gender or anything. Anyway, she claims she didn't know, and whether or not that's true or not is up to history to decide. But and so she was just innocently running the race, and these mean, bad men tried to pull her out. And the fact of the matter is, Jock Semple was not a mean, bad man, and he's been made into the villain here. Jock Semple was a really sweet guy. We got to know him afterwards a little bit. My mom and I went to see him afterwards, and he was really, he said, if there's an unqualified runner in the marathon was his life, remember, he loved that marathon. And he said we could lose our accreditation. No, it wasn't.
World Athletics. from World Athletics that
Well,
controls.
it wasn't World Athletics then, but yeah, I mean, there was all kinds of strange rules even for men back then, and you had to obey the rules or they
Yeah,
took.
rules are rules. And that's what he
Yeah.
said. He said, I was obeying the rules. I was just enforcing the rule. I don't have it. He said, I don't have anything against the women. He said, my mother was quite an athlete in her day. And so and he's been made into the bad guy, but he was really a good guy, just enforcing the rules. So she was claiming she didn't know and she was just innocent, and who knows if that was true or not. But so he saw this number go about. It was an illegal number that was fraudulently obtained, and he gets angry. He goes, "Well, God, this is outrageous. My race is being threatened by this unqualified runner who has somehow gotten an illegal number." So he tried to grab the number. I mean, he wasn't assaulting her or anything. He was the one who was assaulted. One of her boyfriends knocked him into the street, and it's just, and so that somehow later she got into public relations, and she used that whole publicity to promote herself falsely as the first woman to run the Boston Marathon, which was not true. And I was in that same marathon in 1967. That was my second marathon. I came back and ran, and I finished an hour ahead of her. That was never mentioned. And so I didn't have any access to the press or anything. I was just this little student trying to get through pre-med out in California. And but she had this background in public relations, and she parlayed it into a career for herself. And I don't want to take away from the contributions she has made to women's sports and women's health. She's made a lifetime commitment out of women's health, which is wonderful. I think that a lot of the things she did afterwards were fine. It's just that I don't think it's right to lie and to, falsely represent oneself to the public. And so I've always taken issue with that. I mean, I don't have anything against her personally. I just don't like the way she acted in that particular case.
Well, you both did some great things for the sport by challenging the very backwards rules of world
Yeah,
athletics at the time. And it's just something that all the guy runners supported the efforts of any woman who were trying to get into the sport.
right.
But Jock Semple and Will Cloney were caught. They had no money to run the Boston Marathon. It was a backward sport.
Yeah.
It's all there is to it.
Well, the whole culture was backwards. It wasn't just not just those guys. I mean, not just that sport. I mean, the whole culture was backwards. You couldn't, it was very difficult. I was told when I went to interview for medical school, and my grades were good. I was a very good student. I was too pretty to go to medical school. I would upset the boys in the lab, and they had to save the places in medical school for men who were actually going to practice medicine. Obviously, I was very pretty and I was just going to get married and have kids, and they didn't want to waste a spot for me. So that was part of the culture. There was a whole culture. People believed that stuff. And it took a long time before people began to, I mean, if you're not allowed to do something, how are you supposed to prove you can do it? So finally, women began to get access into some of the professions and do pretty well, pretty good lawyers, pretty good. I myself, after that, became a lawyer, and I went to law school and I became a lawyer, and I practiced law for 18 years. And you prove you can do this. That's, you demonstrate the truth by proof. That's the whole thing. And as women began to be able to access some of these opportunities, which they had been denied for centuries, basically. And they began to prove, gee, she's a pretty good lawyer. She's a pretty good doctor. Oh, she's a pretty good CEO, and then things started to change, really started to open up for women. And I think it helped men too, because there was a stereotype about men that men were tough, and if you cried, you were a sissy, and men weren't allowed in the delivery room, And men didn't have much of a relationship with their children. It was all the wife. The wife took care of the children and took care of the house and did the cooking, and the guy was off working. Well, a lot of men love their children and they love relating with their children, and they, if they feel sad, they can cry. I mean, human beings have a whole range of emotions, and each person is an individual. And I've always said, if a man likes to knit doilies, is he any less of a man? No. If a woman likes to drive a truck, is she any less of a woman? No, these are just stereotypes that we inherited in our culture. So I am so pleased to see these stereotypes break down for men and women, really. I mean, I love men. Men are my best friends.
And now a woman is running for president of the United States. So we're
And we'll see, yeah.
some interesting progress. And
Yeah.
And you had someone at the BAA who was really on your side. Jock became on your side and became great friends with Kathy Switzer too.
Yes.
Gloria Ratty. Can you tell us
Yes.
a little bit about Gloria Ratty at the
Uh-huh.
Boston Athletic Association?
I love Gloria. She was like the mother of the marathon. She was there. And after she passed away, I felt so lost. I felt such a sense of emptiness. Without Gloria, she was like the mother of the whole marathon. And
Marcia Baker also.
Marcia too, yes, yes. And they sort of herded us through and told us when we were supposed to be different places and what we're supposed to wear. And oh gosh, I miss her so much. And yeah, Marcia, but there are now women in the marathon, in the whole BAA structure, a lot of women that are very supportive and very helpful, but no one can ever replace Gloria. She was the mother of it all.
It's true. She would go to different locations around the country and find, for example, Johnny Kelly's old trophies after he passed away, and they were being given out to a Goodwill store or something like that, or his paintings. He was an artist like you are, Bobbi.
Yeah.
And I think there's that part of us that we all love nature. I mean, we're out there with Mother Nature, us runners in athletics. So we've all got that connection, that start. But I think what's interesting also is in 1986, finally, the BAA agreed they should change. And one of the things that we all fought for, Ron and Benji and Bobbi, you two, we all fought for, all of us runners from that era, we fought to change the sport to be more professional.
Yes.
And treat the athletes better.
Yeah.
And have prize money purses. And so John Hancock came on board as a sponsor. Dave D'Alessandro was the CEO, and he was a forward-thinking guy.
Yeah, I remember.
And Mayor Flynn from Boston, who was a marathoner himself, ran Boston. And they worked together and said, yeah, we want this, and it's going to be equal prize money for men and women, 1986.
That's so cool.
Pretty cool.
Very cool. Very cool. Good work. I mean, that was good work. Because in those days, all of us runners, we just were doing it for free. We just did it. And we just did it because we loved it. We weren't thinking about prize money. And then, but to make the prize money something special, then that really, I think, put marathoning on the map in many ways.
I think it did. It changed the sport forever.
Yes.
Today, there are these 6 world marathon majors. And
they're talking about adding a couple more.